She did a couple movies. So yeah. And like I said, it's the only reason why she hasn't been back is because she's really into sports right now. But she loves art.
What school does she go to?
Morgan Park Academy.
Where's that?
On 111, right off of Western. Not too.
You have two
Yeah.
and a furry dog.
So, welcome to Sarah Ward from Sky Art. And sorry about that. And we're here to talk about how she turned a master's degree in art therapy, is that right? Into an incredible program with sponsorship, staff, facilities, and lots of served people. So I don't know if you want to start by telling us a little bit about your journey.
Sure.
Okay.
And welcome people in the other world out there, and thanks for coming. So I'm Sarah, and I kind of my path in life. Sorry, my dog's kind of being curious. I brought my dog because I believe in dogs at workplaces. That I got an undergrad in art, the BFA, Bachelor's Degree of Fine Arts, in Minneapolis and San Francisco, kind of a collaborative program. And went to, she's hungry, sorry, I should have fed her. And moved to New York City to teach art in the Bronx with a guy called Tim Rollins, who read classical literature to children, well, not children, but teens in high school, while they drew. And no, Kashil, come here. And ended up going to New York like a good 26-year-old, packed up my whole car, moved there to work with him on a promise. He said, South Bronx isn't for everybody, so I didn't take no for an answer. It was before cell phones, and I just kind of moved out there. Called him on the phone, didn't call me back, called him again, didn't call me back. Called him every day for a week, didn't call me back. So I ended up getting other jobs. And I went to the public library and found a couple art jobs that taught in the school system through galleries, because at the time they hired galleries to teach in the school system because they had no art. And and then also got a job as a assisting teaching or professional artist. I was a bartender. I worked at a dress shop. I did everything. And when I was working in the Lower East Side teaching young kids that live in the Baruch Housing Project. So Baruch Housing Project is a high rise. It's on the East River. And they're 15-year-olds. And at the time, it was 1993. I want to say, yeah, 1993. And the cameras, those, do you want me to take off her collar so it doesn't jingle, jingle, jingle? You can just pop it off. So at the time, the those disposable cameras just came out on the market, and we were doing. You want to take off her collar
The whole
because
thing?
the thing will jingle. Yeah, so she won't jingle. I just pop it. There you go. So we gave them disposable cameras, and we had them do a book on their life, and had them take home the cameras and take pictures. And what happened was they came back and they had all these pictures, but I was like, so we're gonna put these in a book, and usually in a book it'll have something about the author in the back of the book. So let's take a picture of you and let's write a little bio on you. And so they started writing about themselves, and I said, so where, like a bio was like, where you live, where you grew up, what do you like, and all that kind of stuff. And they're like, well, I live in New York. And I'm like, yeah, well, what neighborhood do you live in? And so we started exploring that, and they didn't know their address. And so I said, when you go home, walk around your block, see where you're at, because it's really important to know where you live and where you are in this world. So they did, and when they came back, I said, so this river's really big. It's outside your windows. You've seen it your whole lives. What's this river? Because we were doing a map of their neighborhood, and they're like, I don't know. And I'm like, you don't know the name of the river. So I was like, it's the East River. I said, what's the river on the other side? They said, there's a river on the other side. And so it made me start thinking about a young person's life and living in a community that is possibly less fortunate than other communities, and and thinking about how broadening their view of their life was really important, and making them realize that they're on an island in the North American continent, on the planet Earth, in a solar system, in a galaxy, and to make them feel as though there's more to life than their block by block. And at the same time, kids were drawing. I remember one of the kids drew a burning building, and I said, well, what's that a picture of? And he said, well, that's my building set was on fire last night, and we're homeless. And I also realized that a teenager wouldn't necessarily, to a stranger, to a white woman, or to anybody coming in their classroom once a week for 10 weeks, to say, hey, my building burned down last night. And so I started seeing the connection between art and this like education, and started looking into art therapy. The School of the Art Institute had a really rigorous art therapy program at the time, because they took psychopathology and development courses at the Rush Medical Center, and you took the assessment and did the art at the Art Institute, which I kind of liked. I liked the rigor of it, and NYU didn't have that, so I applied and got in, and started grad school in 1996. And in grad school, you do 2 internships. One is a half a year, and one is a full year. My full year internship, my second year of grad school, was at Cook County Juvenile Court. I worked with sexually abused victims and did art with them. And for this population of kids, it's actually perfect, because they don't have the words to really talk about what happened to them, nor do you, sometimes words can get in the way of them feeling their feelings, or they can make them decompensate because the words are too heavy. And so I started to think about how juvenile court really needed me, and start talking to the chief justices about there's obviously a vacancy here. You need art therapy. Not only with delinquents, because juvenile court is two sides of court. It's the delinquent side where kids are committed crimes, and there's the abuse neglect side where kids are going to foster care, they're abused and neglected, and there's a lot of cross-pollination between the two as well. No eye contact because she'll bark. Just ignore her. So I started to propose it, but the Chief Justice was like, yeah, we don't have money for therapy. Like, that's not something we do. So I graduated, I started working for the Department of Children and Family Services. I was a therapist for severely disturbed children, and all the while just still kind of hunkering to get this job at juvenile court. And in 1998, the Juvenile Justice Court Act was rewritten to allow for therapy to be given to kids, and they called me up and I got the job. It was the first art therapy program in the whole country, the oldest court in the whole country. And I started it, so it was really great.
That's cool.
I established it, I got 2 more art therapists hired. It's very slow at juvenile court, they have freezes. It took 2 years for the 2 more art therapists to get hired. It was actually the first probation class after mine. Probation, like you train for 2 months. I mean, it's a pretty rigorous training. And established the unit, but I also felt like I was going into these homes. I would drive down the street in like my 1982 Volvo, like 4-door, with a trunk that you could put 100 bodies in. I mean, it was huge, but it had tons of art supplies in. And when I'd pull up, all the kids on the block knew I was coming. And so the kids would all run down the block like I was an ice cream truck person, because they wanted to do art. And at the time, Creative Reuse Warehouse was open, so like my whole trunk was just full of bags and bags of art supplies. So I would pass them out to the kids, but really I was going to a house to do art therapy with a kid who committed a crime. And for me, I was like, what is that really, what am I modeling to their sisters and brothers? What am I modeling to all the kids in the neighborhood? When this nice lady comes, I would take them out of the house, I would bring them to a library, we'd go into a private room, we'd do art therapy, they get one-on-one attention, sometimes I'd take them out to eat, I'd bring them, you know, home with like McDonald's or something like, whatever, it wasn't good. I saw it wasn't good. So I started kind of looking into thinking about what is my next place, and where do I want to fill a void that's happening for young people that is not being attended to. And so I went to a conference in St. Louis and heard a woman talk about an art program that she had in Albuquerque, New Mexico, for mentally ill and homeless people. So they would go to this mental health care facility, they would get their meds, they would get their meds, and they would go to her open studio, get soup, and do art, right? And it was that I was like, I want to open that in Chicago. I want to be that for kids in Chicago. And so I started talking about my dream out loud. Someone called me at juvenile court and was like, well, we want you to come down and see South Chicago. And this was in 2001. And it was because I talked about that out loud. I talked to this woman that used to be a teacher at the School Data Institute that ran an open studio program in Oak Park. And this woman who ran a nonprofit real estate development company in South Chicago was part of that art therapy group. And she was talking about how she wanted to start an art program, but she didn't know who to get because it was a violent neighborhood, and she didn't know anything about art. They did housing, but really wanted it. And the woman hooked us up. And so in 2001, I left the most secure job I could ever have in life, probably. To start a not-for-profit, which generally 3 to 5 years not-for-profits, something like 85 to 90% no longer exists, and 10 years is kind of a huge thing for arts organizations to exist, and we've been around for 18 years.
That moment seems really key then when you made that decision. I don't know.
To leave. Yeah, it was really risky. But I also believe if you're not going to do what you love, life's short. And I want to be, when I was at juvenile court, all my coworkers were so complacent Like you could see, like my supervisor was like, "You stay here 5 years, you never leave." That kind of thing. Like you could get away with doing nothing there. You could socialize all day. I could have gone to work drunk and naked, and I would have got fired. You know, it's just like it was such a strong union, and it was just like I wanted to change lives, and I felt like, you know, for me doing art therapy with someone for the duration of their probation, or me doing art therapy for the time that they're in foster care, it made an impact, but I wanted to make more of an impact. I wanted to be the woman on the corner that taught the kids and taught their kids and taught their kids' kids, which I've done that second generation already with some of my students. And some of my students are my teachers now. So I just wanted to have longer term relationships and not. I found when I was with DCFS and when I was with juvenile court, is that you'd walk into a young, impoverished family's home that has been part of the court system their whole life, or they're used to people in their business, and they would open up everything. They'd open their front door. I could be a total stranger. They'd be like, "You want to look at my cupboards? Go ahead. You want to look at see the sheets in the bed? Go ahead." And I found that to be really violating. I didn't want to be a part of violating people's dignity. I wanted to be a part of empowering people. I wanted to be a part of making a change in their children's lives, to treat them with respect. And if they want to talk to me, they can, but if they don't have to. That it's not about like draw your crime and what you would do differently, or it wasn't about draw your sexual abuse, or, you know, show me what happened to you. It was more about like just draw, have fun, enjoy yourself, pursue your dreams, think about things that are bigger than you. Let's go downtown on the train. Look, we're in Hyde Park. We're not in a different state. It's so close to you. All these museums are free. Let's go to Millennium Park. Let's go to the Cultural Center. I mean, I'm hopeful that just those small interventions in their life opened up a world, like opening up the world that the kids were on an island in New York. So that's my deal. I'm sticking to it. So in 2014, now we did a huge thing where we did a campaign to purchase a building down the street. We were in a little storefront. It was 800 square feet. We moved to a 6,000 square foot facility. It was cheap, don't get me wrong, it was less than $100,000, but it was an old cleaner, so we had to remediate quite a bit. It was asbestos ceiling tiles, asbestos flooring, plus they cleaned on the area. So we had to raise a lot of money, and what the great advice for the campaign was, don't just raise money for brick and mortar, raise money for programs, and raise money for the sustainability. So that means a development team, that means programmatic team, and that means building. So we raised $2.5 million over the course of 3 years. We completed a campaign 2 years ago. And we moved into our building in 2014 and started programs. And what was interesting is we were to the east of train tracks, and if anybody is not from Chicago, you'll know that all geographical divides mean different race, different class, generally, except in Hyde Park, where there was a covenant here until 1968. I think the covenant was lifted here for black people to move into Hyde Park or something. But there in South Chicago, it's black and brown. It's the oldest Mexican neighborhood in the whole city. They brought Mexican workers in to cross the picket lines at the steel mills. So there's a lot of tension because of that still. And the steel mills are all gone, but there's still old school people there. The bars, there were 1,000 bars in a 10 by 10 block area. When the third shift got out at 6:30 in the morning, they were packed, and I was just told by an old person that grew up in the neighborhood that the bars were segregated.
Wow.
So there was a Polish bar, there was a Ukrainian bar, there was a Latino bar, there was black bar, you know. So the neighborhood's got a lot of history, but what I liked about it coming from New York, where it was block by block, it was diverse by race and class. And what I found disturbing about Chicago being mile of one racial class, or a mile, you know, and then you go under a viaduct and it's another race and class, you go over a train track, it's another race and class, that it was diverse, and I liked that. It was poor, but it was diverse. And I think the great thing about the center is that we have that diversity. It's, I think, 65%. The last time we had a census, 65% African American, 35% Latinx, and I think what's great about the art center is that we have that diversity in there. So the kids, a kid said to me the other day, I was bleeding, and he said, "Oh, I thought you bled blue," and I was like, "What?" But it's because my veins are blue. So it's about breaking down these fearful barriers of our different color of our skin and having everybody realize that we all bleed red, that we're all human, and that we have different cultures we're from, but the beauty about life is experiencing people's different cultures. And I think we try to have those communications with ourselves at the Art Center. We don't do art education classes formally, we do art as experience, and so kids choose what they do instead of telling them to go in a room and learn primary colors with a bunch of kids or doing landscape drawings. You will not walk down the hallway and see a bunch of landscape drawings at Sky Art. It will be collaborative pieces. It's about not only collaboration, but it's about acknowledging your presence in this world, acknowledging your presence in the space, communicating with people, having social and emotional interactions that are healthy, facilitated by adults. And we have a 4-city lot garden that's 2 blocks away. It's got 30 fruit trees in it. It's a magical place. But the great thing about it is it's food, and we bring the food back. So when we make collard greens and our brown kids eat collard greens, they're like, "Oh, those are pretty good." And then when we make banana peppers with Chihuahua cheese on the grill, and we have our black kids eat that's so we'll have different cultural eating experiences where kids just realize there's not much difference between I like what you eat, you like what I eat. There's not that big of a barrier between us all, and that's what that space creates. And that potentially is what everybody's space could be. And when I was talking to Emily earlier about what everybody wanted to get out of this, and thinking about what job opportunities are in the world for people from getting this kind of degree, and thinking more creatively about creating what you want, finding the voice within yourself that says, I don't want to work at this place, I actually want to pursue my dream. And I think that and I might be Pollyanna-esque, but I think that when you pursue what you really in your gut, if you figure out what you want, it's going to be successful, because people see the need and people will rally. At least in Chicago, it's such a great funding world and supportive world for bringing people together. Look at the Iman Center on the west side. Like, that's an Arab, generated center to really address not only just mentorship and skill building, but also just like that, perception of Arab Americans in this current day and age with terrorist acts going out all over the world, and that the importance of those places to facilitate a voice for a larger group of people that might not be heard as a one, but will be heard as a group. So anyway, that's it. I'm sticking to it.
So, I think the hardest part, like you said, maybe would be deciding to do it. And that's something that would be kind of unique to any individual, knowing that about themselves, hearing the encouragement to follow their dreams and all that stuff. What do you have any lessons learned when you took those first steps, or productive advice, like make sure you have a partner or don't have a partner, or I don't know, just things that might.
The great thing that for me, which I know at the time, if you're from Chicago, Little Black Pearl, do you know Little Black Pearl? Monica started when Ida B. Wells was in its height. Well, not in its height. It was actually winding down. But she was on, what was that, 47th and Kenwood or whatever, all the way over there, where Ida B. Wells was. She bought a 2 flat and started Little Black Pearl, which is a marketing and arts organization. And she did it on her own. And I originally looked at buying something on 61st Street, but Brazier owned everything. So I originally I was like, I want to bring my dog to work and I want to walk to work. Those were the 2 things I wanted to do. I got one. And she said she ate mac and cheese for the first 3 years. Because it is really hard to get funding for 3 years in Chicago, and all I know is Chicago. Um, I luckily partnered with a non-for-profit that had $100,000 Allstate grant to do a feasibility study on the Head Start program. They realized it was too liable. They had half the grant available. And so, because they had all of that money available, they were able to pay for my salary for a year, which I asked for 50. So at least I had that, and then I was with them, so they had a track record with the funding world. Although, so my budget started, I think, at 118,000. It's $1.1 million now, and it was just me. But I paid 40% of that money into that larger nonprofit to do development, to do HR. They did my payroll. They did everything. I taught all the classes and structured the programs. And so partnering with a non-for-profit that has a track record was good. That said, they could have kept me because I started making money my 3rd year. They could have kept me because I was paying them 40%, and that could be really lucrative. 40% of $1.1 million, you know, think about it. Like that's, you know, almost $500,000 just going into the coffers. So the good thing is they let me spin off after 3 years. And so I always say to people who want to start nonprofits, find somebody so you can have their books, because foundation doesn't want to give you money. Not many foundations give seed money. Some do, but not much. Not enough to really sustain yourself. But they will give to a larger nonprofit that has a track record with the money, because they're not going to give you $10,000 or $5,000 because, you know, John Doe could just take that $10,000 or $5,000 and go to Paris, or they could pay their rent for the next month and buy groceries for the neighborhood or whatever. There's no trust. And so being partnered with another nonprofit gives you that trust factor, that they have audited financials for the last however many years that they've been in existence. They have a track record of good standing with Jesse White's office, which is the Secretary of State. All of those things factored in to give the foundation's confidence to give me money. And then when I spun off on year 3, I started bringing in a lot of money. And then also the other thing you want to think about is talking about the promise of a program is different than talking about the program happening. And so when I was writing about it, I'm like, will be. It's really hard to get money for will be. It's easier to get money for it is. And so I had to really make the programs happen and say, like, this is the demand, and these are the people we're serving, and this is why we need it, and all of those things in order to get them to be confident to give me money autonomous, like, you know, on my own. So.
Wow. We got a question. Are there NFP incubator programs in Chicago you recommend?
Well, there's one that's spitting distance from here right now called the Experimental Station. Not many, you know, it's very hard to find, and they're a fiscal agent, so it's not necessarily an incubator, but I think, because they're a fiscal agent, and then like 72 or whatever, what is that? It's like that rental space. I think that's also an incubator. It's downtown. Do you know about it? It's like a think tank space. Better Chicago runs out of it. It's like this real swanky, like fluid space where everybody works. But I think that they're also an incubator for nonprofits. But also, I want to walk to work and I want to bring my dog. And I live in Inglewood. There's so many nonprofits in Inglewood that you could go to and say, this is what I want to do. I will help you raise money, help you get it started, and be hopeful that they'll spin you off if you're not really, like that. Like I said, that's your problem. Like, if you're successful, what happens if they keep you?
Yeah.
And you don't want to be kept. And I'm not sure if there's a contract that you could write that into anything.
There's another question. I am hearing partnership with a larger nonprofit is a formidable way to receive funds, and a good start, ? Just
Yeah.
verifying.
Yeah, for sure. or start without a larger nonprofit and struggle hardcore for 5 years. I mean, the thing about like say Clarice Associates, which was mine, they do housing for low income. They do the what's it called? I was talking about it this morning. Safe passages. So the city contracts them to hire people in the neighborhood to stand on corners so kids are safe walking from school to home. Like hopefully no one's from Clarice Associates, but they chase grants to do programs, and I do programs, and then if the money comes, great. But I do programs because I want to do programs. Some nonprofits do programs because the money's there. So, like, say for instance, in 2006 to 2008, a really huge group of foundations in Chicago started something called Building Community Through the Arts. It was like Polk Brothers, Joyce, Field, the Chicago Community Trust, like all these large things. Building Community Through the Arts, which focused on 3 neighborhoods: Humboldt Park, South Chicago, and Englewood. It was $2.8 million to be shot into those neighborhoods. Bad words, but put into those neighborhoods for 3 years, and they gave it to community members to do programming. Like people did peace circles, they did meditation groups, they did art groups, whatever they did. People just proposed it, and they did these programs. People they convened community, saying what we need and what we want, and then they gave those groups money for that. So something like that, those initiatives that you could just jump on you have to be in the know, but jumping on the what is it, the curtails? What is it, the curtain tails or whatever? Coattails. Jumping on the coattails of something like larger initiatives in communities. Like Detroit has a ton of them. LA, like the problem is going into rural areas, not so much, but in larger cities there are arts initiatives that, I mean, in New York I was hired from a gallery to teach in the schools. So just thinking about that, or thinking about volunteering so that when you start writing about it, it's actually happening as opposed to something that you want to do.
So definitely when you go to these non-for-profits, you should have a proposal already.
And it makes sense to them, right? Building relationships and thinking about like, hey, there's all this money. So the Clarice Association just bought the YMCA kitty corner for us. The YMCA shut down, and they're doing tons of programming. If I was a theater group, say, and I wanted to do a theater program, or I wanted to do peace circles. I mean, there's so much stuff on violence prevention and peace circles, and it's like, think about all the money out there on the table that's not going into a neighborhood that doesn't. Chicago is funded by neighborhoods, right? So if all the funding is going north because all the nonprofits are north, that means South Side it's wide open, and they need to be diplomatic and equal about their giving. And so you say, I can offer this service. What would you think about me providing this? Getting paid as a contractor, and then starting, like, it's successful. I'm at 5 different park districts doing peace circles. It's an amazing program, and now I'm going to get funding for it because I'm going to start my own 501c3. So you can partner with a park district. You can partner with a school. You can partner with a huge university, or a small Malcolm X, or Olive Harvey, or whatever. Thinking about what you could do. There's urban farming all over the city of Chicago. There's one 3 blocks away. We have one. It's through Neighborspace. Thinking about, I'm going to go to all of these Neighborspace gardens and do meditation, or I'm going to do community building through programming. Whatever it is. I mean, thinking about, first of all, you have to figure out what you want to do.
Right.
Figure out where you want to do it, and if there's something there that you can do it with. Right?
I'm excited.
What do you want to do?
My sister and I have been talking about this because we, like I said, your program was in our back door. She wants to do dance therapy. She just got her master's in dance therapy.
Cool.
So as you were talking, I thought about her. But then I have my master's in social work. So I'm thinking about our community. She, of course, wants to bring dance therapy to the community. I would like to do like transitional housing and education for single women that are looking for just trying to rebuild themselves. So, I mean, we got a lot of ideas, but definitely the dance therapy piece would fit into what you were
I
saying.
mean, we were just talking, the woman who runs my school program, talking about how kids are so pent up in the classroom. They're sitting there. I don't blame them. They're sitting there all day, like, looking. I was like, disrupt the classroom, move stuff around. And she's like, well, I was thinking about partnering one of our teaching hours with a dance person. And things like that. Like, you could get into a school just through a nonprofit like mine.
Right.
Partnering up, we have a zillion school programs running right now. Not a zillion, well, 10.
Okay.
But serving like 2,000 kids or 1,200 kids a week.
Wow.
That you partner and then start your foot in, just saying like, this is what we see, this is what's different,
Okay.
you know?
Okay. And she would have been there, but she had to work, and your whole program started, how you started with your degree is
Mhm.
exactly what she did, but with dance.
Cool.
She's working right now at a hospital with youth,
Uh-huh.
and I'll let her. We'll probably come over to the
Cool.
Sky Art, and I'll make an appointment with you
Alright,
so
cool.
that we can talk. Cause I think that's the hardest thing when you're thinking about non-for-profit. Cause I'll be graduating from CTS in the fall. No, I'm sorry, May. And I know that my ministry is not conventional like in the church setting. I definitely want to be in my community. And there's so much going on in my area, which is where you are as well. So learning how to network is
Right.
basically the main thing that you.
And I think speaking it out loud, like saying it out loud, really forming it, having it like, you know, that's what I started doing. I wrote about it and I said it out loud, and I was like, this is what I want, and it came to me.
Okay.
And I think that alternative ministries, hello, I mean, like, that is where we need this in our lives. I mean, I remember Rom came to our site in 2015 when we had a big party, and we had our quinceanera, and he was like, I said, let me get some of that violence prevention money, because he had a shit ton of money, right? Excuse my French. He had a ton. And he's like, well, what you do is in violence prevention. I'm like, excuse me. The kids are off the street. They're learning how to communicate with each other. They're breaking down barriers. How is it not violence prevention? Because we're not saying it's violence prevention. Like, literally, you have to put the title on it, or you have to fill a certain script. I said, it's the year 2019.
Yeah.
We need to think differently about how we're working in communities and how
Right.
we're working with our children
Mm-hmm.
and how to reach them differently.
Right.
And thinking about a program where you're doing dance or, you know, innovative skill building with young teens and mothers and all that kind of stuff, you just need to experience it and make it happen. I think it's totally doable.
Awesome. And like you said, I think the hardest thing in thinking about it is finding the money. But you explained that it's just about getting out there.
Do great work and the money comes.
Okay.
I think. I know that's Pollyanna-esque, but it came to me.
It's kind of inspiring. Kind of hope makes you feel hopeful.
Yeah.
There's a question from a little bit of a while ago. Did you negotiate your contract for spin-off? Wondering if partnering without contract could compromise your program's designs, creative property ownership.
I didn't have a contract. I didn't know they'd spin me off. It was not pleasant. When I spun off, so my fiscal year starts July 1st. When I spun off, they said I owed them something like, I want to say $80,000 or something like that, which was a lie. I did not owe them that money because I wasn't with them for that fiscal year at all. I had moved already into a different facility where I had the programs. So I had to get an attorney involved. Grants were coming in and they were just keeping it. I didn't pay myself until December, and this was like July to December. I had no money. I went through all my savings. I was seen by one foundation, just one, but one big one, that I was hurting another nonprofit by not paying them. Even though we negotiated it and figured out with the attorney and an accountant that I only owed them $14,000, and I paid them the $14,000 over the course of, I think, 3 years, slowly, because I didn't have the money. So It wasn't pretty. I would probably go into it with a contract for sure if I did it again.
Any other hard lessons learned that you would say?
Yes. Choosing your name, it sticks. So don't be haphazard about that.
Okay.
So it was like, you need to choose a name. I'm like South Chicago Arts Center because we were in South Chicago, and I wanted to call it something like 250 degree art, which it wasn't 250, it was like 1,250 degree art or something like that. It was the melting point of steel.
Mm.
So I thought that that would be cool, which would have been really cool. But one of the guys said the steel mills ruined our lives. They didn't, make them. So, and because I was like steel arts or whatever, because it's, it's steel mills. And so I was like, oh, I'll do this placeholder name. I had it for 14 years. No one ever got it right. It was the South Chicago Arts Center. It was the South Side Community Arts Center. It was South Shore Arts Center. It never, even consultants we paid 10 grand to couldn't get it right. So don't pick a good name, stick with it. Something flashy, something short. It's Sky Art now. It became Sky Art. We had this guy redesign our branding, and he said too many times, like people, like Hyde Park Arts Center, they call it the Art Center, or they call it HPAC, or they call it the Hyde Park Arts Center. You just want one word. So make it one word. Buy the URL now.
Okay.
Buy it. Because I had to buy this from someone who had bought a whole swath of URLs. And I had to buy it for like $5,000.
Ooh.
Yeah. But it was part of
Yeah.
anything else.
I think I got those questions. It's really helpful. I think just can imagine a lot of students here interested in doing something. There's a lot of good energy among the students, but finding a job out there is the perfect job for you isn't always possible for every one of our students. So to think you have the freedom to do what you really want to do is very inspiring.
Well, I mean, it's either you're okay with not doing what you want to do, or you're not okay with it.
Yeah.
And I'm not okay with it. I just wasn't. So I went for it. That said, I've just kind of come full circle. I'm back at juvenile court, and I teach finally. I've been, kind of distant from teaching because I've been raising a lot of money, and that's what an executive director does. I just started teaching last April at the Juvenile Detention Center with kids that are locked up, and it's the best part of my week. It's Friday afternoon, and I am just totally in love with it, and I miss it, and I miss make sure that you're constantly grounded by what brought you to doing what you do. Like you said, you have a social work background, and what happens when you run a nonprofit is as long as you love it, that's great, but don't get distant from what grounds you, and teaching kids grounds me. And so it's important, and I'm an artist, so I have a studio and I do my own art. It's really important to have that balance, because running something and hiring people to do what you love to do, like I have this young woman who works for me, and she was with the kids in Millennium Park, and she was doing like Facebook Live, and I'm like, holy shit, she's doing exactly what I did 18 years ago. And it just made me really miss it. And so to keep vital and keep your stories fresh, and to keep thinking about what you're doing, it's really important to do that. Have you heard of the Light Collective?
No, I haven't.
It's on Langley, I think, and 83rd, and it's two social workers that started for homeless kids. They were donated a whole school.
Really?
Yeah, and they're doing housing, and there's a medical thing. They're doing music production. Might be really good for you and your sister to check them out. They haven't started yet, but they raised $1 million like that from the funding world, and they haven't even started.
Wow.
So it was two social workers, and then they've got, it's Light with a Y.
Okay.
And they had I just went into their building like a half year ago, and it was completely a shambles still. It was just a closed down school, but that's like addressing the needs. We're working with homeless kids.
Right.
We want to give them their medical needs, but we also want to do music production with them, because they're really into music, and like give them skills, and teach them and have a place for young moms to come in. So it's a different way of thinking about nonprofits, and they raise money before they even open. That's how compelling their story was.
Mhm.
So thinking of outside the box and then hopeful that it actually can happen.
And LYTE or
Yeah, I think it's the Light Collective.
8030,
I think it's Langley or 87th or
something like that. I'll
Yeah.
find it.
it's in the 80s.
There's another question.
It's 83rd, actually.
Do you know what are the prospects for funding NGOs based in Chicago doing cross-cultural post-colonial work internationally? And this person's project says it involves narrative theology, trauma, and healing.
I mean, if you're based here, we're doing an international grant exchange program with Mexico City. We're applying for one with Haiti. We were talking about maybe Senegal because we want a black community because we're in a brown one now. We're flying a bunch of kids down to Mexico City this summer, and they're flying up here. We're doing an exchange. So I think if your baseline's here, I don't know anything about NGOs, but NPOs, as long as you have a home base, I think it makes a lot of sense, especially in the world and where we're going and evolving. I mean, to think about it, we're all connected through the internet anyway, and that's where all this hate is coming from. And so why not spread some good through it, through doing programs that kind of connect people a little more than some hate website or something like that. I'm not sure if that answers the question, because I don't know anything about that, but I think there's potential for anything if you're passionate about it. Just be based in a city that has a lot of funding. There's not a lot of funding for doing work outside of here, though. I think there is if you go to another country and do an NGO, but there's very few. It's the MacArthur Foundation is supporting us through this national grant. But there's this place, Marvinetta Penn. Do you guys know Marvinetta Penn, who does Global Girls? That's
I do.
83rd and South Chicago Avenue, but she travels to
She does.
India and Africa and does programming every year, and I think she does that through fundraising efforts. So if you get a group of people, to support you, you can fundraise for anything. I got a van because I got turned down from a foundation to buy a van to pick up our kids, and so I fundraised for it at our fundraiser and got $70,000 to buy a van. So
Wow.
you can make it happen if you really want it.
That's
Yeah.
great.
I forgot about Global Girls.
But that's dance.
That's
so
dance.
I think it's a shame it's just girls, but
Wow. Well, one signal that it might be time to go is I'm just about to run out of battery here on my phone. I don't want to cut you off, but and I don't think we have any more questions. But thank you so much, Sarah. It's
Yeah,
so
and
interesting and
please
inspiring.
send me questions. You have to
Yes.
come visit. Come visit. And Emily will share my information.
I'd be happy
and
to do that.
I love the best tacos in the whole city, and I'm not ashamed to say it. And I will defend it.
That's-
I will defend that.
Come in.
Plus, we got 4 dogs at work. This is one. And come visit and see it. It's really beautiful. It's a really beautiful
It is.
space.
It is really
Yeah.
great. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Dude,
What are you, a
guys
student? What are you
soon.
getting next?
I was coming to set up my stuff with you.